I am Alfred the Just, and I'm here to tell you that this video has not been sponsored by Paradox Interactive. The After Action Report style video was such a fun endeavor to make that the guy making these decided to make some more of it. Also, do go out and check out the AAR competition hosted by Paradox. It's a great way to get a free copy of CK3 and tell great tales of your adventures. It runs only until the 15th, so do hurry up. Link, as always, in the description. This is what my life has come to, huh? I fought the northern barbarians, I brought back the light of God into my people's hearts, and then my life will end because I lost a board game to you. Some lone weirdo that makes me read a strange script before I find my end. Not the way I've had chosen to go, but when do we ever get to choose? I mean, what does any of this in the script even mean? CK3, link is in the description? What are you talking about? You're clearly stark raving mad, no doubt about it, and I suppose that means there's no way out of this for me. Is there? You can't reason with someone that lost their mind. Well, if you'd like, I'd like to tell you the story of my life. Maybe it will make you think. If not now to save my life, then maybe tomorrow to save someone else's. I am Alfred the Just, King of Wessex and protector of the Angles and Utes, but I have not always been who I am today. I was born into House Wessex, and we ruled over these lands for generations, for we were good kings. Our rule is supported by the Witan, an assembly of noblemen that elects a king from their own. We are all one people after all, and the king is merely a projection of our collective will. I had seen 19 summers when my journey truly started. I ruled over my lands in Middlesex, recognizing the authority of my brother, König Ethelred. He was the elected König, and he had a true challenge ahead of himself. Our Isles had to deal with an enormous threat. The sea demons, the Vikings, had changed their strategy. God sent them to us for decades now as a punishment for our insolence, decadence, and cynicism. But their efforts reached a peak in the year 867. Instead of simply plundering, raiding, and murdering, they decided that they would attempt to settle in our lands. The great heathen army arrived on our shores, ready to make what was ours theirs. Never have the Anglo-Saxon lords faced a threat such as this one. The centuries after our ancestors arrived on these islands had pulled us apart, left us weak. The Anglo-Saxon kings had not been interested in working together for a long time now. Brothers had become enemies. We were no longer one. The Lord saw our weakness and separation, and he sent punishment accordingly. The great heathen army could have been repelled, thrown back into the sea and sent homeward had we only stood as one. And mind you, some of us tried. I certainly did. I married into House Bureding, rulers of Mercia. I pledged my loyalty and allegiance to Borte, my wife, and her people. When the great heathen army advanced to the west and south from York, I knew that a united front was our only hope, and so my troops joined those defending our homelands, whereas my brother, the König, my brother, he held the title König of Wessex, that much was clear, but he was not the collective will of the West Saxons. He marched his damned armies into the west for a glorious campaign in Dumnonia. I remember it like it was yesterday. When I arrived in the camps of my allies, they asked me where the forces of Wessex were, and I had no answer. I never felt that much shame for myself and my house. My brother betrayed all of us. He fled to the west, touting it as a grand victory for Wessex over the native Celts, when in truth he just fled his responsibilities in the north. The coward. The craven. The wisdom of old is true. The quality of a leader is not tested in the times of wealth and prosperity, but instead when hardship approaches. And Ethelred had failed Wessex. He had failed the Isles, and he had failed me, his own brother. In the north we sought and found combat on our own terms in Leicester, but what does it even mean to fight on our own terms if those terms still mean facing an army made up of bloodthirsty demons with more than double our men? This first battle of Leicester was a defining moment of my life. I saw the brave men of the Saxons, Angles and Utes stand united, and yet it was not enough. They pressured us on all sides, finally routing much of our force. I was knocked out during the fighting, carried off the battlefield by one of my loyal horse riders. Most of my men did not have my luck that day. Soon after, we were defeated by an even greater, overwhelming power. These two battles would make the outskirts of Leicester known as the Bloodfields. East Anglia was lost to Ubba the Dragon. Halfdan Whiteshirt took Lincoln and everything north of York. However, at least the war in Dumnonia was won, right? I returned home that year with anger in my heart. We had lost land and lives to the heathens because of our disunity, and the truth was that all kings of our peoples were willing to stand as one. Except for my brother. A shameful display from the König of Wessex that I am certain will be punished on the day of judgment. I began forging alliances with the vassals of Wessex, convincing them that the vote of the Witan was not without conditions. If the König no longer represented our collective will, he was no König at all. And so it happened that my allies in Wessex took initiative, as I was campaigning in Mercia, aiding my father-in-law with destroying the forces of the High Chief of Jutland that had attempted to exploit the instability caused by the invasion of York. My brother was taken away and brought to my castle in Middlesex, to which he was restricted until my return. When I returned, I explained to my brother that he may rule over his part of the country, but that he had to lay down his crown, as he was not suited to be the König in these trying times. If he were to refuse, he would be viewed as a traitor to the Anglo-Saxon people. He refused my ultimatum, of course, and he felt betrayed. We were brothers, after all. However, I had seen firsthand how my men were slaughtered because of his cowardice, and I could not let this injustice stand. The Lords of the Realm stood behind me, and so I became the König of the West Saxons without a single drop of blood being spilled. After we dethroned my brother, I sought the approval of the Church. It was clear to me back then, and it is clear to me today, that all the ill that had befallen my people could be cleansed by devotion to the faith, the Lord, and the Church. As such, I showed mercy to my brother, and instead of answering the deaths he caused with his own death, I merely banished him and declared that I would support his son Ethelhelm as my heir. This way justice was achieved, while I showed mercy to my own family. I would not be the kind to my brother's Abel. The struggle on the inside of Wessex for power was finally concluded when I received the blessing of Pope Honorius II. He approved of my radical decisions and travelled all the way to the Isles to go through with the coronation. He knew what was at stake. The heathens could not be allowed to succeed in their takeover of Britannia, for that would throw the northern shield and sword of Christendom out of balance and leave the North Sea coast of the continent completely vulnerable to the storm that would then surely occur. Oba the Dragon, conqueror of the East Angles, saw the signs on the horizon. Fearful of my stated ambition to restore what was lost, he committed himself to the Christian faith. Back then, I thought that this was no more than lip service. He had killed thousands of good Christians, many of which came from my personal domain. He had displaced good and righteous Anglo-Saxon lords, only then to turn around and claim we shall not harm him, for he was one of us. He had no right to this land. And so I held court. I invited the deposed lords of Northumbria and East Anglia, hearing their words and naming myself protector of their people. Alfred, Lord of the Saxons, protectors of the Angles and Utes. It had a nice ring to it, of course, but it was also a step I was undertaking, so that they knew my aid was attached to a further, never-seen-before unification of Englaland. Ah, Englaland. A dream of mine, you must know. A unified Christian land in which Angles, Saxons and Utes could live in peace and harmony. Edmund, rightful Lord of East Anglia, pleaded with me. Justice could not reach his lands unless they were returned to him. His people now had to live under phony leadership that acted as though they were Christians, but in truth surely prayed to Odin. I had met the new inhabitants of East Anglia on the battlefield, and my heart could never allow them to demand treatment as equals under their own leadership. Not after what they did to my men. The blood fields were too fresh in my memory. However, Pope Honorius II should be the arbiter of truth, I decided. If we were to attack someone that, at least on the surface level, parades himself around as a fellow Christian, we needed the backing of the Church, or be at risk of opposing the Lord's will. And so Edmund and I readied ourselves for a pilgrimage to Rome. We sailed down to Normandy, made our way to the Alps, crossed them like the leaders of legends, and then arrived to the splendor of the Italian cities, and oh, what a sight Italy is! I can only hope that one day the Isles have the same splendor. Eventually, we reached the Eternal City and asked for an audience with His Holiness. After many nights of contemplation, Pope Honorius II did indeed agree on the right of Edmund to have his reign restored. However, he attached a condition to our cause. "My dear children," he said, "you're right. The Norsemen have ousted the rightful ruler of East Anglia. Even though they are now part of our community, as they have accepted the truth of our Lord, justice mustn't be set aside. Edmund is the rightful Lord of East Anglia, and he must be reinstated. However, you may not bring harm to those that now live in East Anglia. They are invaders. They have slaughtered many of your people. But we mustn't disregard the sacred oath they have taken when they entered the safety of our faith. As long as they are good Christians, do not do them any harm, or you would answer injustice with injustice. Only true justice can set the Isles free. You must make them your subjects and guard them as your own." We thanked the shepherd for his approval, and although our hearts' worries weighed heavy, the Pope's justice was the justice that we would go through with. Once we had returned home, we immediately rallied the troops against Oba. It was time to bring East Anglia under our control. I had vowed to never see a disaster as the one of the Bloodfields ever again, and so I took a cautious approach to the war. Knowing full well that the strategy of the Vikings was one of aggression, I positioned our combined Anglo-Saxon forces behind the Thames, attempting to bait an attack, and of course it worked. This battle was, without a doubt, the turning point in the Anglo-Saxon relationships with the Norse. The invincible enemy had been defeated for the very first time. Their troops had been shown to bleed just like ours do, and the Thames ran red with their blood, marking the end of Norse supremacy over our people. In just a few years, we've had mustered the strength and unity to stand tall against the Norse. The war was over soon after, and much like we promised His Holiness, Ubba and his allies could keep their lands. However, Edmund became their lord and I became his. A new order had been established. An order in which the Angles and the Saxons were unified under the crown of Wessex. However, the face of East Anglia had been changed forever. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but I must reiterate that I did not trust Ubba at all, and as such I kept his wife and daughter under house arrest in my personal domain. I will not deny that this may have been against the spirit of the Pope's commands, and in hindsight it is likely my only true regret in all these years of governance and hard choices. Ubba was mistrusted, but Ubba was a Christian, and he would prove it. After East Anglia was taken, Ella, former king of the lands of Northumbria, raised his concerns about Halfdan Whiteshirt. He had seen my success in East Anglia and required me to repeat it, but in his own lands, even accepting that it would mean my overlordship. Halfdan, of course, was my sworn enemy. He had faced us on the bloodfields and brought shame to my house. And so it did not take much to convince the Lord of Wessex to right the wrongs of the past. Where Ethelred had failed to aid his Christian brothers and sisters, I would succeed. And so we returned to Lieda Chester, to Lincoln. Vengeance was not something I was after. Redemption, maybe. I felt as though I had failed Christianity and all of the men that had fallen in those fateful 2 battles of the Bloodfield. And now it was time we threw off the yoke of the Norse once and for all. Halfdan Whiteshirt himself, together with Ivar the Boneless, were heading south to destroy our forces. Much to my surprise, I was never meant to meet Halfdan on the battlefield again. The story goes that he was dismayed by Ubba's conversion to Christianity. The former companions were now sworn enemies, and he viewed him as weak and as a disgrace. So they marched south, disregarding our armies, to siege down and destroy everything held by Ubba. And then the news reached us. Ubba and his men had slain Halfdan. My mistrust in Ubba had been misplaced. He sought a home for his people, not destruction of ours. I kept his wife and child away from him. I kept good Christians apart. I cannot forgive myself for this blunder, but I attempted to rectify it once I heard the news. His wife and daughter finally free, ready to remain at Ubba's court. Without Halfdan heading their army, the Norse were demoralized, while my side gained enthusiasm for the success of this war. And indeed, we retook Lincoln. While we were unable to free even more land to the north, 2 years of war against the Norse invaders of Northumberland were enough for the moment. My people were tired, and I was tired. But that brings us to today already, doesn't it? I still have so much to say, still so much to do, and yet my life shall end here. Today, in 878. I never had any children that I could call my own. And while I attempted to bring up my brother's son, he has turned out wicked and twisted, cruel and distasteful. The Witan is unlikely to vote for him once I am gone, for he would not make a good king. I can only hope that this does not mean the end to my dreams. England should become reality. Maybe the Lords of Wessex will select the heir of Mercia as my heir. It would be beautiful, as it might lead to unifying the kingdoms together, although it doesn't really matter to me anymore, does it? Now do what must be done. I have served my people well. I'm sure of it. Now this video is the first one in a couple of days, and I want you to know that I was simply a bit sick and then I had to build a new computer. You know, there were some shenanigans going on there, but everything is fixed now. What I want to focus on is essentially a bit more narrated, a bit more edited content. I want to do true storytelling and not just a playthrough in which I exploit mechanics. And this is something that I always wanted to do but never really had the time to, especially because, you know, considering that I had to do the achievements, but all of those are of course done now, so I think I want to jump into this. The series that this was the first episode of is essentially a Quantum Leap series, except with a lot of narration and editing. I hope that the narrating and editing quality will go up as we go, and I hope that you will grow to like this, even if at first, of course, this style of video seems a bit strange. Now, even if you dislike this video, please do let me know in the comments so that I can get some feedback in, and then in a couple of weeks I will decide whether we just return to old Let's Play style videos or whether we continue with this if I was able to raise the quality enough that I'm happy with it. Now, as always, I of course want to thank the members of the channel that are making videos and experiments such as this one possible, namely the Barons, Achilles, Know-How, Charlie, Eterna, Falling Phoenix, Rex Romanorum, Jacob, The Mus Yelago, Dan, Florian, MFW, Mitchell, Thomas, Aaron, Stefan, and Snywolf. Then of course also the Counts, Lachlan, Kizen, Wombat, and Shifty, and last but not least the absolutely gorgeous Dukes, Eric, Kiriana, Goodfield, Nathan, Jack, Kenneth, Evil Duck, and Lex. So thank you all for supporting the channel. I hope that I can produce something here that will be special, not just to me but also to you, of course, and I will see you later. Alligator.